Hey guys, it is so good to have you with us. We are back on the road for day 10 of our new China special series. I am Jonathan Betts alongside my friend here,
CGTN. Yeah.
I know your name.
I know. I'm just. Yeah.
So we are in the city of Shenyang, which is the capital of Liaoning Province. And as we look out the windows of this bus, beautiful morning here. But look at what you see. A lot of skyscrapers. What we are talking about today is urbanization. It is a very unique, interesting Chinese story because when you look at the changes in China over the recent decades, you look at how quickly everything has changed and how enormous these megacities have become.
They absolutely, in terms like Shanghai and Beijing, that they have like 20 million of a population there. But then since we're in Northeast China, actually this part of China started the urbanization like 20 or 30 years ago.
Which makes sense because this was also the first part of the country to industrialize. This is where a lot of the factories, the mines, the heart of the country is that really helped spark this revolution within this country in terms of development.
And absolutely, and this part of China also kind of borders with Russia, the Korean Peninsula, so a lot of trade happened here, since the birth of the People's Republic of China. So a lot of people, they're trying to make money, do business, so they move here to northern part of China, so they can do trade with Russia, do trade with
So when you look at this, when you look at the city now, Shenyang, we keep on calling this kind of the Rust Belt of China, which I don't know if is necessarily fair. We say that because there's a lot of factories, it's a lot of industrial development, but Shenyang, we've been in here for the last day or two. It's a beautiful, very modern city with a lot of fancy malls, skyscrapers, big highways like we're on now. It's a very interesting city here considering its history.
And absolutely, and right now in Shenyang, the population here is about 7 million. So it's a pretty sizable city. But then
anywhere else in the world, that'd be a huge city. 7 million people.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
But in China, it's not so great because, like you said earlier, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, these are mega cities with tens of millions of people there.
And these are, and even for smaller cities, I mean, the local infrastructure has been pretty developed, right? Because you joined us when you arrived in Yanji, in Jilin. And that's definitely not as big as Shenyang, but you toured around, you walk around the city, and how do you like it?
I mean, the thing about China is you are always, at least for me, you are always surprised. We popped into a city called Yanji. That's where I began my trip. Yeah. I had never been there before, had never even heard of it.
To be honest.
I didn't know about it until I got on the plane and landed there, and I didn't want to leave. Actually, truthfully, I did not want to leave. It was a beautiful, smallish city on a river. Everything is lit up. The skyline, the skyscrapers are all lit up in bright, colorful lights. I really enjoyed it. It was a beautiful town, and it's been like that across Northeast China. Every stop we make, every town we visit, every city we visit brings for me new surprises and really kind of welcome surprises, honestly.
I mean, the biggest surprise for me, and since you told me like you found Starbucks in Yanji.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what I tell my American friends is that you have to come to China because everything is going to, I think, beat your expectations. You have to see it to really believe it. And yeah, there's Starbucks here. We passed a Ferrari dealership in the city the other day. These are very, very modern, forward-thinking cities. It's all across China, but especially it seems like in this part of the country.
And I believe my colleagues, Taoyuan and Shang, are traveling through the city of Chongqing in southwest China. So that's a big city as well. It's probably the most populated city here in China. But today they are traveling to a region called Wuxi, also a part of the city. And Wuxi is famous for being like a mountain city with all the terrains there. So let's check out what do they have, right? Okay. Taoyuan and Shang, take it away.
Hey guys, thanks very much, Sinchen and Jonathan. We are now working our way from Chongqing, the massive city of more than 33 million people, to Wuxi County. It's about a 6-hour drive or so. This is what we've been seeing most of the ways. It is very mountainous, so we've been going through these tunnels. So if our picture freezes for just a couple seconds, stay with us. It's just one of the challenges from a technical standpoint that we've had to manage as we continue this very ambitious effort to bring you new China. How much China has changed, how it got here, marking the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Well, we're going to be talking about urbanization today. If you look at Chongqing, Taiyuan, it is a city that is really vertical.
Right.
It grows up, because there's not any more room to go out.
Right.
A couple of problems come with that. When all these people pour out of the building in the morning or going to go to work, it overwhelms mass transit and things of that nature. And secondly, you're more familiar with this than I am, but also the children that have left behind.
Right.
Tell people about
In
that and why
China's
that's a concern.
Well, I think urbanization in China, it means two things, right? One, cities growing out of what used to be farmlands, and two, bringing people who used to live in villages into the cities. So joining us for the discussion again, we have Alberto Lebrun, and we also have Professor Liu Baocheng. So Professor Liu, let me start with you. 2 years ago, I traveled to the deep mountains in Guangzhou and did a story about poverty alleviation through relocation. So we talked about bringing people from the villages into city settlements or town settlements. What's the problem with that?
Well, you make them even poorer because they need a way to survive. Well, the entire urbanization process goes in parallel with the modernization process in China. And you know that China has a unique system to separate the urban area versus the rural area by the hukou system. And then you know, simply by dismantling it in a quasi type of way, we unleashed a lot of productivity by allowing the migrating workers from the rural area to those coastal area to join into the modernization process, working in those assembly lines, particularly for foreign joint ventures, etc. But right now, there are two ways to expand the urbanization process. One is to expand the pancake, meaning that you know, you have the 5th ring road, you have the 6th ring road, and then probably the 8th ring road.
Cities grow
That's
bigger.
right. The other is that you grow in the urban markets or towns into cities, etc. So, for example, Shenzhen is a good example. It was a fishing town, but in the end it turned out to be a modern metropolitan through the entire urbanization process. But the entire urbanization process is really to bring people together, to bring all economic factors together in a free flow so that productivity, efficiency can be boosted and people can see different way of living, and then people should be allowed a different choice. You can't, as you mentioned, you cannot just grab somebody and put it into a building and then, okay, this is the life you should live.
Right.
So they have to make their own choice by providing more options for them to survive.
Alberto, there's a couple of things that really stand out. I spent some time in Tibet, and we talked to a lot of people who had relocated to villages, and for the first time they had running water, electricity, their children could go to schools, and potential to go to college down the road. So there are attractive aspects for the very rural people to come into a city. What has to be weighed, the good and the bad?
Well, for foreigners, there is a huge difference between life in cities and in villages. Now, urbanization rate in China has overcome 50%. So China is in its path to urbanization, to achieve an urban society. Of course, as Professor Liu has just mentioned, this is not about bringing all the villagers into the cities where they can find lots of hurdles and difficulties like settlement, children, education, and even their way of life is totally different. But it is about to transform villages into cities gradually, of course. Urbanization is key to support economic transformation in China. We are coming from Chongqing. In Chongqing, the service sector is growing by 10%, industry is growing barely 5%, and agriculture less than 5%. So this means that urbanization is bringing more better services, higher salaries, and of course a better way of life.
Yeah, let me add, actually a massive, unique way of urbanization in China is to build the special economic zones or economic parks around all major cities. So that can really stretch, the city life into, for example, Yizhuang or in, Chongqing. You have many type of technological parks, economic development parks. You have also high-tech parks, etc., etc. So that's a way, to bring more talent into the urbanization process instead of simply, okay, us farmers, you leave your cow behind and then you come and live in a building. So this is not the way. So by dismantling the hukou system, by expanding
explain what the hukou system is.
Yeah, the hukou system is residential where people are nailed to the village or to the place that they are born, and then even if you shift to the cities, you are not allowed to buy a house, to buy a car, unless you prove that you have paid tax for more than 5 years, etc., etc. So this is really dredging China's feet for the entire urbanization process.
Right.
But again, the special economic zone is a unique way to bring a higher level of urbanization.
Certainly, and that hukou system is also linked to the issue that you brought up at the top of the show, the issue of the left behind children, right, guys?
That's exactly true, because the children cannot really attend college exams outside the town that they are born, and also I think the worst problem is the ideological sense of inequality built into people. Because I do not belong to the city, now I follow my parents, I feel prejudiced. So this is something that really scars the cohesion of the Chinese society. So I think the government has made a number of efforts, but they have to be even more decisive to eliminate this one that can really separate people by birth.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, for the hukou system, let me share my own experience with all of you and the audience. My kid holds a Chinese passport because my wife is Chinese, and he has Beijing hukou, but we went through some difficulties because he was born in Spain and so on. And living without Beijing hukou in Beijing is quite difficult. Why? Because you cannot even attend public schools, public kindergartens. Of course, you cannot buy your own home and so on. So lots of essential services are restricted to non-hukou holders. So in our case, imagine that we cannot have our kids in a public school or public kindergarten. We should go far away and pay lots of money for private education. So having hukou is critical for residents in the city.
Driving, if we look at how rural and rustic this landscape is, it's ironic we're talking about urbanization, but keep in mind that we just left Chongqing, and it basically has 1/10 of the population of the entire United States. I mean, it is a massive city, and we're going to see more and more of that. These cities growing as the highways become more modern, the bridges get better, the high-speed rail connects other areas. Professor Liu, tell me what you see for the immediate future as China continues to try to grow and have a prosperous middle class, as well as lift those people out of poverty.
Well, in addition to what you described, you also see the mountains are getting greener. And so we obviously see a dramatic transformation from living standard, meaning buying cars, buying TVs, and all type of living conditions. But right now we are shifting from the living standard into quality of life. By quality of life, you have cleaner air, you have greener mountain, you have more museums to visit, and you have more concerts, you have a higher level of education for all people, etc., etc. So this is the way China is changing, and now we should really stop the inertia of growth. What is growth for? So growth is the mean. The end is really the quality of life. So despite of the global pressure, despite of some of the gossips going on in China, the government and also those people who are wise enough are very firm to go for a path of quality life.
Wonderful.
And then there has to be a balance between environmental health, between the social cohesion, and also economic growth. So I think now with the clear objective of building an affluent society, and also with the more input into education, and so this country is really moving with full confidence to a better life, so that everyone can really share the growth and prosperity.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think, Sean, this is also the purpose of our journey throughout this 12 days of our New China coverage, to show our audience the New China together with its amazing progress as well as all the problems that still exist, right?
Yeah, it can be a double-edged sword. And again, what I really like about this is you're seeing how vast China is. We're here, we are in the plush southwest. We're going to be going to, or just left a major city, but in the southeast, you know, the financial engine, if you will, that's been driving the economy. And of course, the old industrial base where we find Xinjiang and Jonathan. You guys, we'll throw it back to you.
Hey guys, thanks so much. Let's pick up that conversation here in the northeastern part of China, where we're traveling around and bring in our guest here on our mobile studio bus here, Professor Tongji Meng and Professor Benjamin Zhao. Thanks for being with us. So urbanization in China, it's a big trend here. It's a big topic here. So Professor Tong, when you look at urbanization in the northeastern part of China, what do you see? How much has changed?
Well, it changed dramatically. I mean, the word is dramatically. Yeah. And for me, this urbanization not just reshaped the physical environment, but also the very cultural fabric of meaning for people living in this very city. I grew up, I was born and raised proudly in this very great city, but then I remember when we were living out there in the city back in the 60s and 70s, it was pretty much kind of a living sparsely across, spreading out way of living. People live in those four-story kind of a Soviet-style tongzilou. I mean, the kind of a narrow building with one central hallway, and on both sides of the hallways are actually rooms for households. And now you can see that this is very high density living. This city right now basically is a city of a kind of a concrete jungle, right? I mean, you see all these great skyscrapers, and so it changed the meaning of people, the meaning of the fabric, the community, because people no longer know each other living in those high rises, right? And so urbanization takes place side by side with people moving from these loose, spread out way of living into those high density kind of a high rise building, and in this sense. It improved people's way of living, but then once again it created kind of a dilemma. I mean, there's no longer that kind of a closeness, the kind of close feeling. But then at the same time, once again,
but just again, as Professor Chen mentioned about how fast urbanization has been taking place here in Northeast China, and as we have mentioned, Northeast China led China's urbanization efforts many years ago, but the data shows like in 1996, that's about 3 decades ago, the average national urbanization rate was just merely 30%, but here, close
30 or 13?
30%.
So in 1996, the urbanization rate in China was about 30%. 1 in 3 people were living in cities.
Yes.
Now,
but here, but then just here in Northeast, it's almost 50%. It's like half of the population might live in like city, urban area. But then in 2016, like the national average almost doubled. But then look at Northeast China, it's kind of stayed flat.
So basically, the northeastern part of the country was the first to urbanize. In the last 20 years, the urbanization rate has not changed that much.
So what's happening there?
Why is that? Yeah. Professor Xiao, who wants to take the question?
Maybe I can take a question. I think it's the failure of success. You could actually find some hints of the answers in other metropolitans like Shanghai. If you go to the center of Shanghai, you know that those areas that are most resistant to changes are state-owned. or these kind of factories owned by the central government. Because they are not responsive, their incentives are not responsive to profits. So that's maybe a reason why here, because it has been industrialized faster than other cities. But these factories are owned by the government.
But then the urbanization rate in Shanghai and Beijing, they are close to 80% or even 90%. But right here, I mean, 50% or 60% is still relatively low compared to Beijing or Shanghai.
It is since I think the Zhurongji era, a lot of state-owned enterprise reform in here. After that, the pace of the industrialization slows down a lot.
Yeah, when these industries were shut down, for example, these old traditional manufacturing industries were shut down, workers are actually laid off, and these are actually were highly skilled workers, industrial workers, and then they suddenly found themselves tossed around the street without a job, and then they need to find a way out to support the family. And then with Shenzhen down there since 1992, prospered, and they went down to the south. I mean, they were hired in massive numbers in those great metropolitan, formerly industrial or emerging high-tech cities like Shenzhen, Dongguan, and all these great cities are actually attracting, even the Hainan, attracting these highly skilled workers from the northeast. And so there's a drain, there's a loss of talents, and there's a loss of urban population, especially in Shenyang.
So what is the government doing anything to attract them back?
I mean, right now there is lots of measures, for example, but then I think the first thing first, the industry and some of these high-tech industry is now emerging, and high-tech industry is trying to attract young professionals, and even overseas trained, Britain, UK, US trained returnees back to these high-tech enterprises. So I see the cities now kind of growing, looking much younger. I mean, like we talked about yesterday, I don't see these old gray Soviet-style buildings in the city anymore. I mean, the whole physical environment was changed into stuff like that you see along the river. I mean, all these great high-rise residential and also office buildings.
I mean, when you were growing up, you said here in the 60s and 70s, could you ever picture and imagine Shenyang would look like this today?
Oh, it's never. I mean, and I can never expect such a thing to happen. But, well, it happened as a miracle because of the reforms since 1978 and because of this rapid urbanization that transformed this very city. I think the transformation is so very, very unprecedented that even residents of the city could never anticipate this. I mean, like my younger brother, I mean, he was still working in this very city, and now he's an entrepreneur. I mean, I can never imagine my younger brother now being a rising entrepreneur. I mean, doing his own business.
But I think we need to really look back and think about this problem of urbanization. It seems to be a means, but not an end.
Why do you say that?
If you look at the developed countries, when they get to the rate of 70%, it gets very, very slow to grow. It might not be optimal to go further. If you look at the historical reason, why do people want to go to cities in China? There are very good reasons. Because when in 1950 we decided to follow the USSR heavy industrial policy, but to have heavy industry, we need a lot of investment, long investment cycle. Then we didn't have capital back then. So the rural people were kind of designed to subsidize the urban people, so that their wage was kept low, their food were kept low, so that we could have a lot more money for the factory to build the industrial. Then that means if you are a farmer, you have to subsidize these urban dwellers. So that's why people needed to move. But then the government had to implement household registration system so that they could not move as needed.
The hukou, right?
Exactly.
So let's talk about that, because I think a lot of our foreign audience may not understand this system. The hukou system, and I'm probably going to mess this up, so I'm going to lean on you.
Sure.
It's basically a permit that you get that allows you to live in the neighborhood with the permit.
Or, I mean, the permit, it's not like a residential permit. It's the residential registration system that because anyone can live anywhere in China if they want. But then for it to be benefited from the social security things, the medical like insurance, etc.,
finding jobs,
and even education,
exactly,
jobs,
and they need
you need to have that permit. And basically the idea is to try to manage population, to
migration,
manage migration. So there is this concern I sense from the Chinese leadership that they don't want their cities to get too big, too populated.
Exactly.
And my question is, why is that a concern?
Well, historical reasons, because Chinese industrialization, Chinese urbanization actually is happening in parallel with this very industrialization. Industrialization means that all factories, I mean, basically you start with building factories. And once you have factories, you need employees, and employees have their families. And so back in the past, in this very city, all factories would be a kind of a independent living community. They have their own shops, they have their own schools, they have their own banks. And so it's a community where people living communally, socially, economically, and also politically. And so politically, they're easy to govern. I mean, basically, a certain percentage of the population were party members, and a certain percentage of the population were actually belong to many of the government kind of orchestrated, so some kind of led organizations. And so it's easy to manage this population. And economically, once again, they're easily to sustain themselves. Because sometimes they issue their own ratios, food ratios, and that stuff, so that you can feed this very population that you command. And educationally, once again, you send to school, and so basically, it's all about living communally, so that you can the administrators find it easy to govern them.
But how does that apply to China today?
Well, China today is radically different. I mean, there's huge, great reform in terms of policy, encouraging people to move freely, and which is why China built the largest railway network and also highway network. This city, once again, is connected by this Jinha and Jingshan expressways, and also, I mean, Dongzhou, I mean, the high-speed rail. I mean, I actually came back to the city by high-speed rail. And so once again, this urbanization happened on many bases. But then once again, the drivers are different from what we see in the West.
It is, especially a lot of city officials. Their evaluation system was on GDP and purely GDP in many sense. Now the story has changed a little bit. We talk about green GDP, but before, GDP is a flow concept. It's not a stock concept, meaning your salary is a flow concept. Your wealth is a stock concept. So if you had a temple, €1,000, if you tear it down and build a new one, then we didn't count the value lost by the history, but just the material used for building a new building. That's the GDP.
So there is a focus now to make the cities more livable and to add more cultural attractions and preserve cultural attractions. But again, with China focusing on trying to keep migrants at home, keep rural people in the farms, build companies there, entrepreneurships. There's a lot of investment in programs to try to encourage more development in the countryside. How would you sum up how that is working? Is it working, and how well is it working?
I think there's pros and cons related to the household system. In one direction, the rural people want to come to the cities to enjoy the benefits.
Right.
On the other hand, our land reform policy has not been completed. If you give up your hukou as a farmer, then you might not be entitled to the compensation of the land if it's being developed. So, the migrant workers, which is about 300 million right now, people. The government actually wanted some optimal portion of migrant workers to go to the cities to provide cheap labor. At the same time, they also want some of them to go back to build their village. So land policy is a key issue here.
Without question. It's a complicated issue here, but I mean, without question, when you look at China, you look at the cities, so much is changing, and so much is changing quickly. As Professor Tong was saying, it's just incredible to think that in his lifetime, this city has completely sprouted pretty much out of nothing and has grown into honestly a huge modern mega city with everything you can imagine, whether it's a Starbucks or a Ferrari dealership. It's all here.
Absolutely, yes. And now I think our colleagues Lindy and Chongxi has more from southeast China, and that's a pretty developed region here. So what do you have there?
Well, thank you so much to our colleagues in the Northeast, Xu Shenchen and Jonathan Betts. Now, of course, we here on the southeast route are in the beautiful city of Guangzhou. It is the capital and the most populous city of Zhejiang Province. And as you can see from the picture there, of course, it is a beautiful day. It's all blue sky, it's green, and a lot of scenic areas in
a lot of greenery.
Exactly, very much so. And it's all scenic spots and also skyscrapers here. Yes. Very well known, of course, for the West Lake, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that attracts millions of visitors to Hangzhou every single year. The skyscrapers, of course, pointing to the business and industry that is established here. And that has made this city one of China's most important for being a Chinese city of opportunity. That's according to PwC and the China Development Research Foundation.
Well, I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that this city is home to tech giant Alibaba. I think this is a company that has transformed how Chinese people shop and pay and travel, and just generally how we go about our lives. We use Alibaba services every day. So the birth of this internet economy in Hangzhou has really transformed the city, right? This city is used to be known as this manufacturing base, a trading hub, and more so as a tourism and culture hotspot. But now it's considered one of the tech capitals of China. I think Shenzhen probably also has a claim to that title, but Hangzhou is pretty good too. And it's also, according to some people, they're calling it the new first-tier city. It's on some level on par with in Beijing and Shanghai in some sense.
Currently, it's considered a second-tier city, right?
Yes,
okay.
yes, but they're calling it the new first-tier.
The new first-tier, all right, rising up the ranks.
Yes, as I said, this is the birthplace of the internet economy. Many tech firms spring up in this city every year, and there are so many of them I can't count right now. Right. So naturally, this attracts a lot of talents to Hangzhou, high-tech young talents. For example, I've seen the Alibaba complex. It's a massive, massive complex that a lot of people live and work and go to the gym. They do everything inside of the complex.
Amazing.
And they live nearby.
That's amazing.
Right.
I actually didn't realize that Alibaba, I thought maybe they moved here. I didn't realize that this is where Jack Ma was born.
Yeah, this is where he started Alibaba and went door to door to promote their services. And look at where he is now.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and we see a lot of like residential blocks, pretty new ones along the way,
definitely.
right? And all of these high rises of different sizes and shapes. So a lot of international events have and also boosted the city's status and image. For example, the 11th G20 summit in 2016. In 2022, the city is going to host the Asian Games. So a lot of these events and the city's status as a tech hub has pushed up home prices in a way. Now, home prices have risen in recent years, and according to statistics, now the city has expanded very quickly. From 1990 to 2017, a great deal of rural areas transformed into city blocks, and consequently, the urban area of Hangzhou increased 8 times during that period.
Sure, that's incredible. We'll talk more about that housing issue a little later, indeed.
Yes, and as the city is expanding such rapidly, there naturally comes a pressure to maintain good governance, good urban governance. So this high-tech city is using high-tech solution to address that issue. And here's a look at how the city is doing it.
Long lines and stressful waiting times can be the worst things about doctor visits, but they're memories for people in the tiny city of Hangzhou, thanks to digital technologies. Wang Juan is one of many happy patients.
You can register for doctor services on your smartphone at any time without lining up and waiting. You can see the doctors first and pay medical costs and check examination results after leaving the hospitals.
and patients no longer have to go to different departments for various documents and payment procedures. At one of the city's best but busiest hospitals, doctors also applying the latest technology to assist community doctors elsewhere. They offer remote consultations, and some other doctors also using voice recognition technologies to improve medical and prescription filing.
For doctors, internet technology upgrades play an increasingly important role in medical treatment. It is vital to get access to patients' related medical records at our hospital as well as at other hospitals.
Digital technology has also helped the city set up China's first internet court. People no longer need to physically show up in court to settle lawsuits. Many say this internet court saves a lot of time and money.
Generally, I hear about 25 cases a week. The efficiency has been largely improved, and we have handled over 10,000 cases since last May.
Hangzhou's reinvention as a digital and smart city is an example of other domestic and global cities to follow. Tech firms here have worked closely with public services. For example, tech giant Alibaba has developed an artificial intelligence system called City Brain to help ease traffic congestion by working with local traffic police. With the help of big data and cloud computing technology, this City Brain system will initially monitor traffic, but will also inform authorities on how to manage energy, security, and public safety in the urban area.
Our city brain system started operation in Hangzhou and has expanded to dozens of domestic and global cities like Shanghai, Macau, and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Besides medical services, Alibaba Cloud is also partnering with public and private sectors to upgrade services like transportation, parking, and tourism. All these are believed to be urban pain points which require more data collecting and analyzing to improve their services. Wu Lei, CGTN, Hangzhou, Zhejiang Province.
Well, so much to talk about as we uncover some of Guangzhou's story, how the city transformed to become what it is today, and how come it still manages to attract so many young people to this city. Well, for more on this and more, let's bring in our guest now, Andy Mock, a senior fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and we're joined by Tim Clancy, who is the Guangzhou Culture and Tourism Promotion Ambassador. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us this morning. Tim, I want to start with you. You've lived in Guangzhou for 9 years, which means you've kind of witnessed how the city has changed. Just talk us through some of the things you've seen and the ways in which this has become this incredible urban center attracting young talent.
That's correct, Lindy. I've been here for 9 years, and when I first came to Hangzhou, it was very different to what it is today. Everything has improved so much in the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years. The roads, the transport, the mobile electronic payment, shared bicycles, various kinds of new technologies being used by people here, and also the government is promoting young people entrepreneurship and incubation of these fantastic ideas that will ultimately stem into commercial end-user use, better commercial end-user use for everyone. And Young mentioned before, we're actually right near the West Lake, which is a UNESCO World Heritage listed site. Hangzhou recently, from the Yuhang district, boasts another UNESCO World Heritage site, and this is the Liaoning archaeological site, which was the last Neolithic jade culture in the Yangtze Delta region. So I'm very excited to live in a place that has 2 UNESCO World Heritage listed sites and has such a beautiful, it's a beautiful place to live. It's a vibrant city full of energy, and new things are happening here, and the experimental ground for what cities of the future could be like.
Yeah, it definitely feels livable, right? Just driving around you can kind of just see what a pleasant lifestyle one could have in a place like this.
And
right?
to you personally, like what attracted you to come to Hangzhou in the first place, and after you finished your school education here, like what made you stay here?
Well, amazingly enough, I spent 2007 to 2008 here as part of a double degree at UTS, where I did engineering and international studies. Now, 1 year I had to spend abroad. I could select from Beijing, Tianjin, Shanghai, Kunming, Hangzhou. Now, what drew me to Hangzhou is I heard from people that the lake is very beautiful, the weather's very pleasant, it's rich in culture, it's not a big city, and you can really get to know China through this sort of place. If you're in Shanghai or Beijing, it's a bigger city, faster pace, maybe the experience is not as good. And luckily enough, I picked Hangzhou and have been rewarded. I met my lovely wife here and we got married. We spent a few years in Australia, then we came back because we thought she wanted to be close to her family, but at the same time, we thought there'd be more opportunities here. And amazingly enough, many things happened. Many international events happened here. The G20 and the Asia Games will be happening. And it has really been a good move living in Hangzhou, I believe.
Nice, nice.
Mr. Mark, here's a question from a policy perspective. Because a lot of cities, especially in the northeast or in the west, are facing this issue of losing talents. But on the other hand, a lot of tech-savvy young talents are coming to cities like Hangzhou. So what is the city doing right here?
Well, I think Hangzhou, from a policy perspective, is doing some things right, of course. But I think we also need to understand something about the culture and the historical significance of Hangzhou. So Hangzhou occupies an almost a really mythic place in the consciousness of many Chinese, especially educated Chinese. So if we look back, it's one of the ancient capitals of China. So there's a lot of history here. But maybe more importantly, from a cultural perspective, it's incredibly important. I think this is one of the most significant places in China. So if we look at just say two poets from Hangzhou, Bai Ji and Su Dongpo. Okay, so they were not only famous poets, but Bai Ji wrote almost 2,800 poems, and one of the most famous poets in China. So why this is important is that it really has a strong, attractive quality. So we think about the people that go work at the Alibabas, the software developers, the product managers, the user interface designers, the creative class, as Richard Florida might have termed it, that these people are not just attracted by economic opportunities as well as a beautiful place to live, but they need resources, opportunities that will enrich their souls and inspire them. And I think this is something very, very unique to Hangzhou, and one of the reasons it's attracting so many young and talented people, not just from China, but around the world, as we see here with Tim here in Hangzhou as well.
Thank you very much, Andy.
I want to bring up something now that touches on something that Shang-Chi said about how this is now fast becoming a first-tier city. That's going to have implications, right, for various industries and sectors, one of them being housing. Tim, starting with you, how does that affect residents of the city? Are house prices going up? What's really happening in that area?
Well, in the first several years when I first came to Hangzhou, it was very popular for people to invest in housing. And President Xi, he made some policies and he said houses are for living in, so it restricted the ownership of houses. You couldn't go and buy 20 or 30 of them and have them sitting there vacant. So yes, the housing prices have gone up in Hangzhou, but I think housing is still manageable and affordable to a degree.
Yeah.
But maybe Andy will glean some light on this.
Right. Is rising home prices a necessary byproduct of urbanization?
I think in one sense, of course it is. So we think about markets, supply and demand. So when there's greater demand, of course, prices do go up. But I think on the other hand, housing is a basic human necessity, whether you're single or whether you're looking to raise a family. So in this sense, I think China is taking a very balanced, nuanced approach to say, of course, it is an asset class, but we want to avoid speculation. We want to avoid it being solely or primarily something used for investment purposes, because of course it has intrinsic value. People need a place to live. So I think we're looking at different approaches. Some of them, of course, are conventional, people buying a place, financing it, and there's government policies that can support and encourage that. But also, we're also seeing the rise of more innovative forms of living. So especially amongst these young people working for tech companies, these communal living type arrangements also are another model that we're seeing develop, not just in Hangzhou, but Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen as well.
It's interesting for me because looking at the way people live in China, it is a little bit different from what I know from home in South Africa, but quite similar to what's starting to emerge in Kenya. So of course Nairobi, a place of a lot of Chinese investment, a lot of Chinese construction happening there, and you see a lot of these high-rise buildings, these tall apartment blocks that have hundreds of units, which means hundreds of people are living there. Whereas in South Africa, people tend, especially middle-class people, tend to live in single-family homes. Exactly, they want a house with a backyard, their dogs in the garden, their kids are playing.
Well, the US and Australia, I think, is also like that as well.
Right?
Yes, I'm always dreaming about having my own shed in the backyard.
See, I'm similar to you. I really want a garden. I'm curious about the Chinese model, though, and how this kind of aesthetic of urbanization came about.
Right, unlike you guys, I mean, living in an apartment comes very natural to me as a Chinese. I never thought of the necessity of having a big house, so this is quite a difference.
Well, that's true. It could be very much from if you're small and you're used to that.
Yeah.
That's just how you live. These terms of vertical living, it's even more prominent in Hong Kong, where they have even less land.
And they space, right?
But the planning's very good there, and I imagine the Hangzhou planning is starting to become very good as well. And this is an experimental ground for how a future city could be. And with the recent, before the subway was built in Hangzhou, transport and many new roads and the subway being built has really made the transport much better here and more convenient for living, and all the services downstairs from where you are living.
That is convenient. So that's probably one key element of China's style of urbanization, convenience and efficiency of use of space.
Yes. I think that's a part of it, but I think we also need to look at, it's also a expression of the history of China. So when we look at China as an agricultural society, as all countries started as agricultural societies, but the kind of agriculture in China was very labor intensive and more communal, whereas we think, say, in a place like the US, the farm was typically a family farm, a relatively small family with a lot of land, whereas in China it was the opposite. It was a relatively small amount of land with a lot of people all related, a clan working the land together. So today's housing, urban housing, I think is an expression of this historical experience, but also it's a recognition of the realities of China in that, especially in the coastal regions, population is very dense, land is at a premium. So this way of living is also, I think, a very practical way of approaching it. And lastly, when we look at the environmental pressures, not just in China, but all around the world, limited resources, growing populations, that this kind of urban living with shared common areas, whether we're talking about parks, swimming pools, things like that, are actually a much more environmentally enlightened way of building a society.
Yeah, so you'll probably see more of these types of urban structure or urban plans.
So I think a combination of economics and culture and a host of other factors created very different dynamics between how people live in the West and how people live in Chinese cities, right? In Chinese cities, most middle-class people just live in city centers, but in the West, probably they live more in the suburban area.
That's true, they move further away from the city.
Right. But Mr. Mark, could the rise of transportation power change some of that? Because the Yangtze Delta region is having this city cluster concept where people are encouraged to live further away from the city center and pretty much commute to the city center to work.
No, absolutely. But I think also for the benefit of our audience to understand, I think most people around the world understand this concept of an urban core with high population density. But in China, even what we would call the suburban, the quote-unquote suburban areas are also high-rise apartments as well, but they just happen to be away from the CBD or the central business district.
Right.
So if we extend this idea to the region, so the Yangtze River region or the Delta region as well, high-speed rail is critically important because it allows people to live in what we might call satellite cities.
Linking of satellite cities.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think the goal is to let people travel to pretty much any major urban area in about an hour.
That is common in Hangzhou. Many people would live in Hangzhau during the weekend, or even possibly every day go to Shanghai, depending on how far away their work is from the station. That's a very common trend.
Well, it's about half an hour by high-speed rail from Hangzhou
if you
to
live
Shanghai,
near the station
right?
and your destination in Shanghai is also near the station, it's not inconvenient to do that every day, and it's not costly.
What I certainly like about Hangzhou's development is that even though you've got these high-rise apartments, they've really maintained a sense of the greenery and just the scenic environment of this place. It's really beautiful.
One of the best in China. There are also other places comparable, but Hangzhou probably is very much right up there for the greenery and the feeling of nature in the city environment.
In fact, there's a very famous Chinese saying that roughly translated means there's heaven above and there's Hangzhou and Suzhou on earth. Meaning
we're going to Suzhou tomorrow.
Yes, we are. But that Hangzhou and Suzhou are like heaven on earth.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yes,
your
Chinese is pretty good.
Honor. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful conversation to our guests. It's time for us to head back to our colleagues in the Northeast, but don't forget to join us tomorrow. Of course, as you've mentioned, we will be in Suzhou, another beautiful place here in Zhejiang Province. See you then.
Thank you, Lindy and Yang Chengxing from Southeast China. And we're back in Southwest China in Shenyang City, one of the largest cities in this region with a population of 7.5 million. Pretty modern and urbanized, right?
Yeah, it's been great driving around. That's going to wrap up our coverage here of urbanization on our new China special series. A very long, in-depth, interesting conversation here as we look at these modern Chinese cities across the country, north, south, southeast, southwest. But we'll have much more coverage throughout the day on CGTN on our broadcast network. And we'll be back here at 1400 Beijing time with another digital hit on something much more different.
A lot more fun, yeah.
And maybe it's a little bit more fun. Yeah. So that does it for us here. Thanks so much for watching. Tune in for the rest of the day for more coverage.
In 70 years, China has undergone unprecedented transformation. From its old industrial base in the northeast to its new manufacturing powerhouse in the southeast and to its emerging southwest, CGTN offers you a panoramic view of contemporary China. Our crews will travel along 3 different routes and come to you live from dozens of locations and free mobile studios. Join us for an all-inclusive look at China on our TV channel and digital platforms, September the 9th to the 20th. It is New China, then and now, in celebration of the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, only on CGTN.